looking for, not just what is spiritual, but what is spiritually true. Yes, sir.
I read the caption to your new book, The Lamb and the Furor, where you make a contrast between Adolf Hitler, the one who shed the blood of millions, and Jesus Christ, the one who shed his blood for millions.
Right.
When we look, whether religious or non-religious, when we look at Hitler, we see a monster. We see one who promoted war and promoted genocide. How then do we explain Jesus, the God of the Old Testament, where when I read the books of Joshua and the books of Exodus, where it seems as if God is promoting, if I could say that word, war and genocide. In the book of Samuel, you read where God is ordaining Israel to take out man, women, and child of tribes and nations. And I'm a Christian, and I'm struggling with this. How do we give a rational justification for this?
Very, very, very fair question. I think if there are 2 or 3 very tough questions for a follower of Christ, that is one of them. I always think of that coming in the Old Testament over against the New, and I think that's there's a clue in there. First of all, let me put it in the broader perspective. When you raise the question of evil and suffering, you always have to have God in the paradigm to justify the question. If God doesn't exist, there's no absolute moral law. If there's no absolute moral law, there is no good. If there's no good, there's no evil. The question self-destructs. So only with God remaining in the paradigm is the question a valid one. You must always remember that. Then you move to the paradigmatic expression of it. When God called the people of Israel to, and by the way, even the Quran mentions this. Even in 2 significant verses, Muhammad mentions that they were a special chosen nation by God. And if you look at that, it is fascinating. Why didn't he choose Rome? Why didn't he choose Babylon? Why didn't he choose Greece? When the subjects he had to deal with were philosophical, Greece would have been great to have picked for the revelation. When he was talking about glory and splendor, Babylon would have been great. You know, when he was looking at the power of Rome, Rome would have been great to talk. But he chose this tiny little nation that was laughed at by Greece, bullied by Rome, and enslaved by Babylon. And he says, you are the little maiden of my eye. So immediately you know that it was an unmerited love. So that's the first part of the paradigm. But he said to them, when you follow me, you will be blessed. When you turn away from me, you will be cursed. Now, the judgment and the horrific loss of life and all must always be seen in the context of something else. The manifestation of his presence was as literal as that, was as dramatic as that. The revelation on Sinai, the thunder and lightning and the encounter with Moses, the dramatic period of miracles under Moses, under Elijah, under the time in the New Testament period when Jesus came, there were classical periods of miracles. Now, when the demonstration of God's presence is as dramatic and incontrovertible as it was, then the violation of that brings similar demonstrable entailments so that the blessing and the cursing are on an equal footage. That's the first part of it. Remember that it, as tough as it is, if, for example, supposing today this room was to be rent and an angelic figure descended and all of us were in stunned silence and a voice emerges from the heavens saying, this is my son, listen to him, and we were all witnesses to it. And we still chose to refuse him and chose to reject him as the sovereign of the universe. I don't think we have the right to complain if a dramatic judgment follows at the same time, because to whom much is given, much shall be required. So the proportion of the blessing was even greater than the proportion of the judgment. And the last thing I would say to you is this. When I take a life, I am wrong because I cannot restore that life. When God orders the taking of a life, He also has the power to restore it. And when that life is restorable in His power, the ultimate tragedy is not death. The ultimate tragedy is the rejection of the authority and His power. That's the tragedy. So I don't think it is a loss of life, because that which God protects and preserves is His. And as horrible as it may seem to see that tragedy, it is a grim reminder of what sin actually is.